Let the word go forth.
Fool me once.
Are you fired up?
I'm not a crook.
Are you ready to go?
Shame on you.
It's Abe Lincoln's Top Hat, hosted by Ben Kissel.
Fool me, can't get fooled again.
Hey, what's up, everyone? How are you? Ben Kissel here. Hope you're doing well. There's a bunch of stuff politically going on this week regarding the Russia investigation. Obviously, Paul Manafort is on trial. It's going quicker than people thought it was going to go. So who knows? We might have an outcome on that trial within a couple of weeks here. He's facing 300 years. Which is a bit of an overkill in some ways. But today I wanted to focus on the opioid epidemic. If you recall, Ben Westhoff, he was the author of Original Gangsters. That was a book that was used heavily for our Biggie and Tupac episodes on the last podcast on the left. He's working on a new book called Fentanyl Inc., and it's all about the opioid crisis. So I thought it would be good to bring him back so we can talk to him about that crisis because it was on the tip of everyone's tongue a couple of months ago or maybe a year ago, and now it seems like it's been pushed to the back burner. But the opioid crisis is still taking 60,000 people a year. It is killing so many of our friends and family. So let's focus on it today. I hope you enjoy this interview with Ben Westhoff. Today, I am honored to have with me. He was already on the Patreon for his great book Original Gangsters, which was used when we did our Biggie and Tupac episodes for the last podcast on the left. But he is working on a new book, and it's called Fentanyl Inc. It'll be out, I believe, here in the spring. And his name is Ben Westhoff. Thank you so much, Ben, for being here.
Well, thanks, Ben, for having me.
All right, so let's get into this, man, because obviously the opioid epidemic, it's massive, it's huge. It's not really being talked about right now. It was on the tip of our tongues a couple of months ago, but as the news cycles go, it is now on the back burner, and no one is discussing still one of the biggest drug epidemics of our time. Can you tell me a little bit about your thoughts on the opioid epidemic and what is it doing to our country?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the people who have died from it, it's actually the biggest drug overdose crisis in the history of America, if not the world. Oh. You know, and fentanyl is the biggest part of it. You know, I think a lot of people are aware of the heroin deaths and the prescription pill, the OxyContin deaths. Mm-hmm. But fentanyl has actually surpassed both of those. And in a lot of cities, especially in the East Coast and in the Midwest, you can't even really get heroin anymore that doesn't have fentanyl in it, you know, or it's very hard.
This term fentanyl, this new drug, it hasn't been in our culture for very long. Where the hell did this thing come from, fentanyl? When we're talking about, I believe there was just a famous singer who overdosed recently, and I think it was because of fentanyl. She was hospitalized. Demi Lovato. And now, of course, she is out of the hospital. When did fentanyl really hit the streets? And do you have any indication through your research of like why it happened?
Yeah, well, Prince and Tom Petty both had fentanyl in their systems when they died too.
Oh, brutal.
But yeah, it was originally created as a medical drug back in the early 60s, and it's still widely used in hospitals and in patches. You know, it's for cancer patients and people with extreme pain. But it started to be used illicitly on a really large scale only in the last 10 or so years. And it's only really started killing people massively in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years.
So where is it coming from? Is this all just overprescribed medications, and then those overprescriptions are being sold on the black market? Where is, because obviously we have Donald Trump, who believes it's all coming from Mexico. He went to meet with Duterte in the Philippines, came back with the idea for the death penalty for individuals who sell drugs such as fentanyl. Where is all of these drugs? Where are they coming from?
Well, they're actually all made in China. And, these actually aren't the prescription fentanyl that people are abusing. This is illicitly produced fentanyl made in kind of underground Chinese labs mostly. And then it actually is sent to Mexico, and it's the Mexican cartels who bring it into the U.S. Donald Trump has said a lot of silly and ridiculous things about the opioid crisis, and one of them is that building a wall would stop it, which is not true. The thing about fentanyl is it's tiny. It only takes a pinhead amount to overdose on, and stuff like that. You can have 1 million doses in a tiny little DOP kit. And so, people don't, building a wall wouldn't do anything. People smuggle them in through cars when they're crossing the border and underground tunnels and stuff like that.
So why have the cartels taken such a liking to fentanyl? I mean, I would assume probably with the legalization of marijuana going, I think we have 20 states now where it's whether it's legal recreationally or medically. That probably took a little hit out of their bottom line. Is it just about the money for them? Did they just find a new opportunity, a new market for this drug to make some cash?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the thing is, fentanyl is much more profitable than marijuana, than heroin, than meth, because it's so potent and because it can be made so cheaply. So with heroin, you need a whole field, you need to grow poppies, you need to process it. It's a very time-consuming and expensive process. But fentanyl can just be made in a lab, and you can get, a whole kilo of it for just a few $1,000s. So it's much cheaper than heroin and much more potent too.
So when you were researching for the book, I assume you talked to some individuals who maybe they had family members who overdosed, or maybe they went through their own issues. Do you have any stories that you could share with us right now about some of the people that you met and interviewed with along the research process for this new book? Yeah,
I actually had a friend who died from a fentanyl overdose. It involved the patch, actually, the prescription patch. And he got addicted to opioids. And his name was Michael Schaefermeyer. And then one night he was drinking and he had, a patch on, and he died that night.
So that was the medical patch that he had received from the hospital for treatment, or can you get these patches on the black market too?
Yeah, you can get them on the black market, and I'm fairly certain that's how he got his. But yeah, a lot of the stories involve the dark web, and there's an 18-year-old kid named Bailey Henke from Grand Forks, North Dakota, whose death in 2015 launched a whole international investigation, but his friends would get this stuff off the dark web, and there's lots of people selling it, and it's very easy just to have the stuff delivered directly to your door.
Yeah, so if you're in North Dakota, which is the state that I was born in, by the way, it has more cows than people. That's true. So if you're in rural North Dakota, you want to get fentanyl, you find it, you literally you go on the dark web and you just order it, and it just comes like an Amazon delivery package?
Yeah, basically. Yeah. I mean, I've seen they send it in fake packages. Sometimes they'll send something that looks like a cleaner, like Ajax or something. And if you looked at it, you really would think it was a package from Amazon. But if you're in the know, you open it up and it becomes clear. And the stuff is just coming through the mail all the time, and it's really hard to stop.
So is there a demographic specifically that is being hit by this? I know it's a lot, as you mentioned, with North Dakota. There's a lot of rural individuals who are suffering. The opioid epidemic has taken out a lot of those people. So in so-called Trump country, even though they're much more diverse than just possibly being Trump supporters, is there any demographic specifically that you have seen that this fentanyl crisis, this opioid crisis, is really affecting?
Yeah, it is affecting a lot of young people for sure, dark web savvy people. But I think in general, it's taking down a lot of longtime heroin addicts too. And these are people who might have had a heroin addiction for 5, 10, 20 years, and then they get one dose that has some fentanyl in it, and they die instantly. And that's a big part of this.
Is there any way, I know they have these like drug testing kits you can get online. and perhaps those will indicate if there's some fentanyl in it. Is there any other way to tell if you're taking if you're doing heroin, if you're taking pure heroin, or if you're taking this heroin cut with fentanyl, or should we all just assume at this point that it will be cut with fentanyl?
Yeah, you definitely should assume that. And I do recommend the fentanyl test strips. There's one company in particular that makes them called Bunk Police, who do a really good job. But there's also another method wherein if you just, you don't take the full shot, you just take like a third of the shot or a small part of the shot to get a sense of what you're getting before going all the way. And that could save lives. But I've heard that that's not as appealing to a lot of heroin users because, they want the full rush of it right away.
Right. Hi there, Ben Kissel for Software Advice. Marcus and I know about podcasting and politics, but not always the other sides of running a business. That's why we have a network of folks to call when we've got a real head-scratcher of a problem. When it comes to getting advice on what software to use, we've got our new go-to people software advice. When it comes to picking the right software for your business, Software Advice has done all the research for you. Their team of advisors can point you in the right direction so you can start working more effectively right away. And it's absolutely free. Just go to softwareadvice.com/Abe and answer a few short questions about your business. You'll be connected with an advisor to discuss the best software options for your needs. Talking to an advisor takes just 10 minutes or less. Whether you're a construction manager, a medical professional, an HR pro, you name it, Software Advice will save you time and help you make a more informed decision. And if you're an entrepreneur like me, or you work solo, Software Advice is a great way to get an expert opinion even without the resources of a big company. These experts are ready to be your on-call go-team to help you figure out business software in minutes for free. Why wouldn't you start here? End the software struggle today. Go to softwareadvice.com/Abe to get started. That's softwareadvice.com/Abe to connect with an advisor for free. softwareadvice.com/Abe. What is there anything when you were doing the research? And again, Fentanyl Inc. Check out this book as soon as it comes out. You got to buy it because this is just one of the biggest issues facing our country today. And once again, as I said up top, it needs to be talked about a hell of a lot more than it's being talked about because it's murdering our children. Is there anything that was super surprising to you regarding this crisis?
Yeah, I actually went to China and I infiltrated a couple of these drug operations. I pretended to be a buyer. And so I got to go inside of them, and see the labs where they operate. And, one of in some of these places, they're fairly professional. There were like giant mounds of synthetic cannabinoids like K2 and spice and different fentanyl analogs being made. And the thing is that the Chinese government has sort of said that they're interested in cracking down on this, but in a lot of ways, they're making the problem worse through all these various tax incentives to their chemical industry. And a lot of these companies make legitimate chemicals and pharmaceutical products, but they also make the fentanyl ingredients and some of these other drugs. And so the Chinese government is sort of like encouraging this industry financially, possibly without even realizing it.
What was the reaction when you were over there when it comes to fentanyl? Was it sort of that, did you get that vibe of those were individuals who did not do their product, who did not take their product, and were they aware of the death toll that is rising on a daily basis here in this country, or like many pharmaceutical industries, perhaps completely didn't care about it?
Almost nobody in China has even heard of fentanyl. It's not widely used in that country at all. There's very strange drug habits in China. Like nobody smokes weed, but ketamine is one of the most popular drugs, along with heroin and meth. But as far as these companies go, they know what they're doing, absolutely. They they sometimes employ all these salespeople, these like young, cheery college graduates who have no idea what they're doing, selling these chemicals. And I talked with a lot of them, and they claimed like complete ignorance, sort of a don't ask, don't tell situation.
Right. So they have these people. These people are actively marketing fentanyl to countries around the world.
Yeah. Yep. That is definitely happening. And this huge company that I visited, they had like rows of cubicles, hundreds and hundreds of employees, and they sell the fentanyl precursors, which are used to make the drugs. And they told me that the countries they sell most to are Mexico and the U.S. And they're selling it directly to the cartels.
That's interesting because, of course, we all think about a scene out of Breaking Bad where a drug maker is creating this stuff in their bathtub or whatever. But it seems like it's much more corporate than that.
Yeah, it is. In China, it definitely is. It's it's all about the money there. It's less of a cartel sort of environment.
So to take it into the context of like the war on drugs, I suppose, it seems as if the Chinese government now is killing tens of thousands of Americans on a yearly basis. What is there? Is there any way to retaliate against them for these deaths?
Well, yeah, it's a very complicated puzzle. Some people talk about it as kind of a reverse opium war. In the 19th century, the England's East India Company was selling opium to China, and the people there were addicted in large numbers. And then the opium wars were kind of battling back against that. And so now it's sort of like the reverse. It's like China is supplying this opioid to the West, and it's kind of like global capitalism gone amok in a lot of ways. And
right,
there's no simple solution. China needs to work a lot harder. First of all, just to stop incentivizing it. But some people are worried that the Trump's trade war is sort of going to throw a wrench in this opioid discussion.
And how would the trade war throw a wrench in it?
Well, if China is if we're sort of picking a fight with China on trade, they might be less likely to cooperate with us in terms of shutting these companies down.
Sure. So when it comes, let's go back to the States. That's absolutely fascinating. You never think about cubicles and pitch people and salespeople when it comes to illegal drugs like fentanyl, but evidently that's what's going on over there. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for that insight. That must have been horrifying for you going undercover there. I mean, this is, I understand the relations between the U.S. and China aren't that tense or as tense as they used to be, but that still must have been quite nerve-wracking.
Yeah, it really was. I had to sort of lie on my visa and say that I was there as a tourist, and then sort of hope I didn't get found out. But another thing to recognize is that these drugs are still legal in China, a lot of them. So these countries were operating legally in China. So, that made it a little bit easier.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's interesting. It's legal, but it doesn't seem like a lot of people are doing it. Maybe because they know the very, very dangerous side effects.
Yeah, it's hard to say why the opioid problem is biggest in the U.S. and Canada. And in other parts of the world, it's not as big. And I think it might have something to do with the prescription pill, the overprescribing. Seems like it was most common.
Well, that's a great pivot point here. Let's come back to the States and talk about big pharmaceutical companies. Is there any, what insight do you have on their role in this entire epidemic? Obviously, they're going to say that people should just use these drugs as prescribed, all this kind of stuff, but at the same time, they are complicit in the overprescriptions, and they want to make money at the end of the day, so they're certainly willing to push their products. What's Big Pharma's role here in the States regarding this crisis?
Well, the company that seems to have the most culpability is Purdue Pharma, which makes OxyContin. And they advertised their product as something that you couldn't get addicted to, more or less,
Yeah, right. Right.
And even when their own research showed that like 13% of people were getting hooked, they published that it was less than 1% or something like that. And, but it's a complicated problem. Like in 2010, they made it so their pills couldn't be crushed up easily and snorted or injected, right? And because that's what a lot of people were doing with OxyContin. They called it hillbilly heroin. And literally just crushed it up. So they made these pills so they couldn't be crushed up. But then the effect of that was people said, well, we can't crush these up anymore. We're just going to do heroin instead. And, it seems like there's been kind of this rush to curtail prescriptions from doctors, try to make doctors prescribe opioids less. But if you take someone's opioids away, a lot of times that just turns them to street drugs like heroin and fentanyl.
Yeah, and obviously with prescription drug prices going up and down on what seems to be a whim, I know a lot of people, as soon as heroin becomes cheaper, they go over to heroin, and then vice versa. When it comes to big pharma, obviously we had the huge tobacco trials back in the day. They were fined millions and millions of dollars. What do you think has to happen? Should we treat big pharma? Because I've said this for a long time. I think we got to start treating big pharma like we did big tobacco back in the day and start holding them accountable. But they spend so much money, $40 million a year spent on lobbyists and just giving it to congressmen and congresswomen. And, they are so ingrained in Washington right now and in our politics. Is there any way that you see happening in the near future that there is some repercussions for the propagating of the opioid crisis?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of momentum right now, actually, for the type of lawsuit that you're talking about, like the one against big tobacco. And a bunch of cities and states have gotten together and are suing these companies. And the U.S. Justice Department has indicated that they're willing to be a part of it. So I think it's only a matter of time before the states get huge amounts of money, billions of dollars from these companies.
Yeah. So just going back to some more of the case studies that you did, it's funny because, I'll drink my beers and I am certainly no Puritan when it comes to drugs. But when it comes to heroin and when it comes to fentanyl, at no point have I ever had the desire to really do it. Is there any personality traits or just any characteristic that we can point to and say, this person might be more susceptible to doing something like heroin? Is there anything like that, or is it really just completely random?
That's a really good question. I'm sure that there might even be like a gene that makes people more susceptible to highly addictive behaviors and patterns like that. I don't really know enough about it, but I'm kind of like you, and I always saw heroin as like the line you do not cross. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it just seems like it would be too good.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as like all the needles and it's just such a brutal drug. There's a great documentary warning this drug may kill you, all on the opioid crisis. I don't know if you've had a chance to see that, but that was kind of one of the things that stood out to me. Was just like it seemed like it was mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers all across the board that got addicted to this. Is there, and of course, when we talk about hillbilly heroin, or this is a drug affecting a lot of rural areas. It's a lot of coal miners or construction workers. Perhaps they get injured on the job, and then they get addicted to opioids. And we hear that story time and time and time again. And it just seems so bizarre to me that history keeps on repeating itself.
Yeah, it's really true. It is totally a case where a lot of just normal law-abiding citizens who probably didn't even smoke pot were prescribed this for things they didn't even need it for, like a root canal or some sort of minor back pain. These were drugs that were supposed to be prescribed for cancer or for like end-of-life situations. But there was just a new lawsuit filed against this company that made this fentanyl nasal spray that's called Sebaceous or something. But they actually employed like strippers and a woman who performed sexual favors for doctors who would prescribe this stuff, and they would prescribe it for just any ailment. You stubbed your toe probably, and they're like, here, have this nasal spray. And it's insane the length that these companies went.
Well, it's very difficult to be an erotic dancer. I understand. I couldn't do it. I would immediately break both of my ankles and probably a wrist or two. So I get it when it comes to pain. Hi guys, Ben Kissel here for Filter Easy. Filter Easy is a super convenient subscription service that delivers AC filters right to your door. I'm going to be honest, I don't think we here at LPN had ever changed our filters, and the old ones looked really gross when we swapped them out. If Filter Easy helped us breathe easy, they can help you too. Keeping your indoor air clean isn't at the top of your to-do list, but it should be. Poor indoor air quality is a sizable health risk. The Environmental Protection Agency ranks poor indoor air quality as one of the top 5 environmental health risks. In fact, indoor air can be 2 to 5 times more polluted than outdoor air. Clinical studies demonstrate that air filters sufficiently reduce particulate matter and allergens, resulting in reduced respiratory and cardiovascular symptoms, and even preventing disease progression. For something so important for your health, most homeowners and renters don't usually know how often to change their home air filters. It's recommended you change your home air filters every 1 to 3 months, but if you have a pet, you should probably change them every month. Filter Easy knows it's easy to forget to change out your filters. That's why they do all the remembering for you. When it's time to change them, they'll be at your doorstep. Signing up couldn't be easier. All you got to tell Filter Easy is how many filters your home needs and your filter sizes. Sign up takes less than 5 minutes on your computer or mobile device. Filter Easy is a convenient subscription service for something you need versus most other subscription boxes. It's super practical and a no-brainer solution. That's why I subscribe to Filter Easy. And for listeners of this program, you can receive your first order free by visiting filtereasy.com or by calling 1-855-910-EASY. That's 1-855-910-3279. Make sure you use offer code TOPHAT. Sign up today at filtereasy.com to get your first order free. That's filtereasy.com or call 1-855-910-EASY. Make sure you use offer code TOPHAT. You mentioned marijuana, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on marijuana as a replacement for opioids when it comes to, medical marijuana or even recreational use. Do you think that marijuana is the key to solving some of this epidemic?
Well, not marijuana exactly, but I think something that's gaining a lot of speed that people think is working is called medication-assisted treatment. And that's the use of opioids like methadone, and there's another one called Subutex. And what those are, they are opioids, but they don't get you high the way that heroin and fentanyl does. So they're administered by a doctor, and they help you get through the symptoms of withdrawal so you can kind of get your life together, And some people don't think this is a great solution because they're like, well, you're just substituting one drug for another drug.
Right.
But really, people can live. It's not the drug that kills you, In some countries, like the Netherlands and Switzerland, the government will prescribe you heroin. The government pays for people's heroin if they're addicts. And, you can survive until a ripe old age on heroin or these other opioids. It's just the other factors that kill you, the dirty needles, the, passing out in an alleyway and getting shanked, turning to prostitution to support your habit and getting an STD, ultimately, it would be the best case scenario, obviously, if we could get people to not be addicted to anything. But the next best case is these, methadone and these other methods.
Right. And of course, Gandalf, I believe he smoked opium every day, and he's a wizard. So it is okay for some people, but maybe not all. When it comes to, let's talk a little bit about that legalization. That's an interesting point because I'm very conflicted on this notion. Obviously, we have what happens in San Francisco right now. There's actually a map that indicates where people have publicly urinated and pooped. It's the poop map of San Francisco. It's quite disgusting, despite the fact it's such a wealthy city and rents are extremely high. And then we had the situation, we had a chance to go over to Vancouver, and we did our show on East Hastings Street in Vancouver, and heroin was basically legal there. They had a needle exchange program, things like that. And I gotta say, man, it was the saddest street I've ever seen in my entire life. There was one woman rather, who was just digging her nails into the concrete. I don't know what she was searching for, but obviously her nails were breaking on the on the rubble there. And everyone looked, I mean, it was really out of, Resident Evil. No one looked happy. Everyone seemed to be about as miserable as a human being can be. So what are some of the more reasonable solutions from total legalization to complete incarceration? What do you think, through your research, is the best answer to solve or to persuade people or dissuade people from using heroin?
Well, kind of along the lines of what you said before, in Vancouver, things actually used to be a lot worse. And Vancouver is kind of a case study. If you think it's bad now, but they got something that's called a supervised injection facility. Mm-hmm. And that's where you're a place where, it's a clean hospital type environment where you're allowed to go and shoot your heroin, and they provide you with clean needles. There's doctors and nurses overseeing it. They're ready there with Narcan if someone overdoses. And
Sure.
They don't have any of these in the U.S. Whenever they think about putting one in the U.S., people throw a big fit and they don't have it. But in Vancouver,
well, it's interesting because I know that they do offer that, and I think there's something to be said about that. But then the vast majority of people using heroin, they're just going to the hotels there, and they're not going to these facilities. So how do you get? It's nice that they're there as an option, but then the real hardcore users, I mean, they're not going there.
Yeah. Well, there are different ways to get people in. Sometimes it's this medical assisted treatment like I was talking about, where they give people the methadone and stuff, and that sometimes draws people in. But yeah, sometimes they offer therapy. It's a difficult thing to master, but even getting free needles is maybe worth it. I'm not an expert on it, but you're right. It's a hard problem.
Right, because of course you don't want to live in a world where you try to condone it or make it seem like that's something that everyone does, because again, it is very difficult to get off of the stuff once you're on the stuff, and certainly we don't like to see people suffering. What is that like, by the way? Do you have any insight on that? What is withdrawals from heroin like? What
I've heard is that it's like a really bad flu, basically. It's not like the end of the world. It's not like what's that movie where they tie themselves to the bed and freak out. Anyway, that Darren Aronofsky movie.
Requiem for a Dream?
Yeah, Requiem for a Dream, yeah.
Oh my God, Requiem for that movie, honestly, I know movies, they don't always have the best influence on people, but after I watched that movie, I think that was the one that I said, I think I'll skip on the heroin because I don't need to be doing any, crazy butt stuff in front of a bunch of billionaires. I think I'm all right. I don't need my arm falling off.
Yeah, exactly. So I've heard that it's like a really bad flu. It's maybe not the end of the world, but it's just a miserable way to be. And if you can take yourself out of that, why wouldn't you? People say they can't get up to go to the work in the morning. They can't play with their kids. It's right. Just, it's just like that.
Yeah. We're going back to your friend, who I'm so sorry that he passed away. What was the reaction when he overdosed in the community? Was the community stunned that it could happen there? Or, I know I have a lot of friends in South Florida or from South Florida, and OxyContin overdoses are so common now, it almost has become not shocking whatsoever. What was the reaction when your friend passed away? Were people stunned that it could happen there?
Yeah, definitely people were. This was before the opioid epidemic was even really a thing. This was, a few years back. And so, people and he was so young. It's just like a shocking thing. When I was coming up, people didn't die of drug overdoses so much as they just had really bad experiences, and then they went to rehab, or they, were throwing up and it was awful. But People just
Right.
dying like that at a young age. It's really insane.
So we have this guy, Attorney General Jeff Sessions. Obviously, what he's doing right now with, the militarization of ICE and all these things that are happening are pretty abhorrent. He wants to crack down on legal marijuana. Is there anything that the DEA, is there anything that Jeff Sessions is doing right now that is like mildly proactive, or is basically the entire U.S. policy at this point just incarceration with zero rehabilitation?
Well, what Jeff Sessions has said is that they're going to crack down on the dealers harder than ever, but they're not going to crack down on the individual users. And so, this is a little bit of a progressive shift since, the days of the crack epidemic and things like that. And so that's good. But the problem is that in reality, these aren't like, the fentanyl dealers, the heroin dealers aren't usually like these giant kingpins. They're just addicts themselves who got into dealing to support their habits. And so when you say, you're really cracking down on the dealers, like the dealers and the addicts are the same people,
Interesting. Yeah. And what do you think as far as, it's funny, you mentioned crack cocaine, and obviously that spawned the war on drugs, which is why, we had 350,000 folks in prison in like 1979. Now we're at around 2.5 million. Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Obama, even to some degree. No one stopped it. Everyone loves our. They love having folks incarcerated for their bottom line. They make a lot of cash off it. Geo Group and Core Civic. Do you think it is a different approach than the war on drugs regarding the crack epidemic, which was just incarcerate? And now, obviously, we have a situation where African Americans predominantly use crack. Now we have a situation with opioids that and is very diverse. A lot of white folks using it. Do you think there's any racial disparity when it comes to no, I do not want people incarcerated for drugs, but do you think there's any racial disparity when it comes to the enforcement of the epidemics?
Yeah, I mean, there's the racial politics of it all is definitely a big factor, and I think when it comes down to it, the people who are making these decisions, the judges, the politicians, the police, a lot of the influential people tend to be white, and now they're seeing people they know, their own families, members who are dying from the opioid crisis, and that has really made them think differently, and they say, well, it really could happen to anyone. My kid wasn't a bad kid, so he needs to, should be treated like someone who's addicted, not like a criminal, and it's a shame that there's this sort of racial attitude towards it, but ultimately I think it's a good thing that this is happening, and that it will apply to other drugs as well, you know what I mean? And so I was in Grand Forks, North Dakota, and they talked about how the opioid response, as you know, North Dakota is one of the most conservative states in the country, but they've had a really progressive response to the opioid epidemic, and it's spilling into other things too. And they were saying like now even alcoholics are being seen as people who have a real problem, and we should treat it like an addiction. So
Right. Hi guys, Ben Kissel here for Quip. Be honest, have you been brushing your teeth right? The fact is, the reason your dentist is always lecturing you is because most of us don't brush correctly, not for long enough, and forget to change our brushes on time. Quip's a great electric toothbrush that's really changed the way I brush my teeth. Quip's a small, sleek electric toothbrush that's a fraction of the cost of the bulkier brushes you see in stores, while still packing the powerful vibrations of those bigger brushes. There's no chargers or wires, making keeping your teeth clean easy at home or on the go. Quip has a built-in timer that helps you clean for the dentist-recommended 2 minutes with guiding pulses that remind you when to switch sides. Their design makes it easy to swap out brush heads on a dentist-recommended schedule. Quip delivers new brush heads every 3 months for just $5, including free shipping worldwide. Another thing I love about Quip is that it comes with a mount that sticks right to your mirror that serves as a travel cover, making it easy to have minty fresh breath on the go. I'm not the only one who loves Quip. They were named one of Time's best inventions, were on Oprah's O list, and Quip is the first subscription electric toothbrush accepted by the American Dental Association. Quip's backed by a network of over 20,000 dentists and hygienists, and hundreds of thousands of happy brushers use Quip every day. Quip starts at just $25. If you go to getquip.com/Top Hat right now, you'll get your first refill pack free with a Quip electric toothbrush. That's your first refill pack free at getquip.com/Top Hat. Spelled GETQUIP.com/Top Hat. Well, what are some of the things that they're doing in North Dakota that makes their policy more progressive regarding taking on this epidemic?
Well, these test strips, like we were talking about, they're starting to distribute these in the community. They're doing this medication-assisted treatment. Grand Forks is such a small place. They don't even have any doctors who do this, but they passed a new law that said you can communicate with doctors on like a Skype sort of system to get these drugs. They have stuff like they amended the Good Samaritan law, so now you can't be thrown in jail if you call the first responders to help someone who overdosed. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay. Right,
yeah,
right.
That's really helpful because a lot of people just, if their friend overdoses, they freak out and they're like, I don't want to go to jail myself. So they just they drop them off in front of the hospital. They just drop the body off in front of the hospital and speed away. So
right.
Yeah, those are some of the kind of things, and it is really heartening to see that it sort of cuts across political lines. A lot of this stuff, and also the other big thing is Narcan, which is the drug that reverses opioid overdose. It's like a miracle drug, really, and so that this drug is starting to become more available. A lot of communities are paying for it and distributing it, so that's really helpful.
Now, is Narcan, can you get that over the counter, or is that another prescription?
Yeah, you can get it over the counter.
So that does seem like something that everyone should just kind of have on hand, and I would assume most schools and things like that have it on hand now as well.
Well, it's slow, but yeah, definitely firemen, first responders, police, all sorts of people. Even like places like Philadelphia in the restaurants, they were getting people passing out in bathrooms and stuff like that, so they keep it on hand. Yeah, definitely.
Right. When it comes to just the youth, I just turned 37, so now I have to say the words. When it comes to the youth, by law, I am forced to say that. It seems like it's very difficult right now to be young. I know it always is difficult, but it seems more so than ever. Suicide rates, they say they're up 25%. Do you think that this desire for escapism, just the culture that we have right now, has it played sort of perfectly into the hands of the feeling of euphoria that heroin gives? It's so difficult to navigate this new reality for so many people. Do you think that has played into why heroin has become so popular, just from a cultural perspective?
Well, personally, I blame social media, but that's another type of heroin, I guess.
Absolutely. The little drip of Twitter, tweet. Yeah. I completely agree, and it's leaving everybody with in a zombie-like condition.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't know why this is seized hold, but I do agree that there's people are just having trouble coping with the way things are, and it's a cycle, I guess, in society. Yeah,
absolutely. All right, man. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It's one of those. This subject is very near to me because I think a heart goes out to these people who really are victims of a crisis, and it just seems like it's going to be so difficult. Do you see any way in the future of just kind of turning the tide here? We had 60K dead last year. The numbers are supposed to go up. I just feel like every single solution is taking a Dixie cup to a sinking boat and trying to get the water out, but it's almost impossible. Do you think in the near future we're going to start seeing the tide change a little bit and turn and start saving some lives?
Well, unfortunately, I think it is still going to get worse before it gets better. And I think in the U.S., we're not really embracing the progressive solutions. I mean, like in Europe, they don't have a problem with these new drugs. And by new, my whole book is about not just fentanyl, but these new drugs like K2 and Spice. And what these drugs are is that they're replacements for traditional drugs, like ecstasy, marijuana, heroin. These are all drugs that, an LSD, for example, like LSD and marijuana are the two safest drugs. No one has ever died from either of these. And even ecstasy, if it's real MDMA, is relatively safe. But all these new drugs are people are taking them because they have easier access to them and they're cheaper. And in countries like Spain and Portugal, where there's decriminalization, people use the regular drugs. They smoke weed, they even use heroin, which is preferable to fentanyl. And right. It's a tricky thing to advocate for legalization, especially of these hard drugs. But the war on drugs, it's just more and more of a resounding failure. There's no other way to put it.
Yeah, absolutely. Fentanyl Inc. Get this book when it comes out. It's going to be a must read. Thank you so much for being here, man. And I don't know, I guess we should end on something positive. So don't do it. Don't do fentanyl. That's what I'd say. Yes. Maybe that's it. Is that the that's the overall theme, I think.
Yeah, I mean if it's just a matter of doing it, not doing it, I'd say just not do it.
Not do it. That's right.
If I can make one more plug, I'm not on social media, so it's hard to sort of keep track, but my website is benwesthoff.com, and you can sign up for my little mailing list. This is something straight out of the year 1997, but
I love it.
That way
yeah.
I'll put you in touch with and just Googling my name, Ben Westhoff, is the easiest way to find it.
Yes, Ben Westhoff. Google it. A pony will show up at your door. It'll deliver you a package. Going old school with it. I think that's awesome, man. Yeah, I mean, I'm barely on the social media. I like Instagram because I like the Insta stories, and then I can talk to people.
Yeah,
which is kind of fun. All right, everyone. Ben Westhoff, Fentanyl Inc. Check this book out. Thanks so much for being here, brother. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Ben.
All right, there it was. I hope you guys enjoyed the interview. Fascinating stuff. I can't believe the guy infiltrated China. Unbelievable. All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much for listening. I hope you're doing well. Hail yourselves. You can find us at email me at thelastpodcastnetwork@gmail.com. You can DM me on Instagram as well. If you know anyone struggling with the opioid crisis, or if you have thoughts of your own, or perhaps you went through heroin addiction and withdrawals, feel free to message me. And, of course, I will read everything, and I'll put it in my brain, and then perhaps we can talk about it as well on the show. So thank you all so much for listening. Hail yourselves. We'll talk to you soon.